Let us turn to the other conflict at the moment in Gaza, because that is where it is much harder to reach an agreement and a ceasefire. Earlier, senior Hamas officials told the BBC that there were intensifying efforts to try to mediate and reach progress on reaching a ceasefire, and that despite the fact that on Wednesday the Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza said that 45 people were killed that day alone. Let's bring in our Gaza correspondent Rushdie Abu-Alouf. Rushdie, tell us more about the deaths in the last 24 hours. Are they also from people who were queuing for aid distribution?
Yeah, Mark, another day of war in Gaza. Since midnight, the Hamas-run Civil Defense Agency said about 19 people were killed. 3 of them were near the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation Center in central Gaza. 3 bodies were taken to hospital and 35 people were injured. The 19 people were killed also in different places. The biggest attack was in a school in Sheikh Ridwan area in Gaza City, where about 9 people were killed. Another incident in the middle in Nusayrat camp, and 1 airstrike in Khan Yunis that killed 5 people. Yesterday, there was about 70 trucks of food were allowed into southern Gaza. But overnight they were looted, all of them, about 70 trucks carrying even medical supplies and flour and aid for the people were looted by gangs and by some of the clans belong to families in the south. But in the north, about 25 trucks were allowed into Gaza and were secured for maybe the first or the second time by families, and some say that Hamas secret police was also trying to help some volunteers securing the trucks into a warehouse belonging to the UN in Gaza, using the old mechanism of sending SMS messages to people. And we have seen in the last half an hour people queuing, very long queue of people in the front of this warehouse waiting to receive aid.
And it's because of that looting, Rushdie, that the Israeli government, we understand, has put out a new rule halting aid deliveries over the next 48 hours in order to find a way to stop what they accuse Hamas of looting the aid.
This was a very bad news for the people of Gaza, because this will worsen the already, disaster situation in Gaza. Well, I spoke to a Hamas official today about the ceasefire, but I did ask him about the Israeli decision, and he said Hamas did not involve at all in securing or stealing the aid from Gaza. But it was a very bad, shocking news for the people of Gaza, because the very little aid is allowed is not near enough, but it is allowing. I mean, Israel every day is allowing. I mean, suspending the aid into Gaza will means more suffering and more starving, and the people are exhausted, because since the war resumed in March, very little aid was allowed into Gaza, and even with opening the distribution centers backed by the Americans in the south, that was not enough, because like 80% of the people who queue every day did not end up with getting any food. So this decision will no doubt worsen the situation.
Yeah, and a reminder that before the 7th of October, some 500 or 600 trucks per day of aid were getting into Gaza. So it has been a trickle since then, and another hold-up for 2 days is, of course, disastrous for the people in Gaza. Rushdie Abu-Alouf, our correspondent for Gaza, currently based in Cairo. Thanks very much indeed. Well, let us turn to Gershon Baskin, who is a former Israeli hostage negotiator who has spent almost 2 decades negotiating with Hamas and secured the release in 2011 of the Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit, who had been held for 5 years by Hamas. Gershon Baskin, very good to talk to you. Do you see now an opportunity for momentum in wrapping up the war in Gaza after the ceasefire with Iran?
It seems to me that the only way, perhaps the best way, the fastest way to end the war in Gaza is for President Trump to do what he did with regard to the war in Iran. He simply told the parties that it's over and now there's a ceasefire. This is what Trump needs to tell Netanyahu, that the war is over. Israel needs to withdraw from Gaza. He needs to tell Hamas what they already know, is that they can no longer govern Gaza. He needs to tell Mahmoud Abbas of the Palestinian Authority to appoint some legitimate person to form a temporary government over Gaza, and needs to tell the Arab countries, Egypt and Jordan and the Saudis and the Emiratis and anyone else who's willing to help bring law and order back to Gaza. This is the way to move forward. This is the only way to get the hostages home, to end the war and have a ceasefire.
And yet he seems to have done that in January, Gershon. I mean, I was in Tel Aviv in January when the first ceasefire came in, and it was, of course, after Trump leaning on both sides. But as you well know, Benjamin Netanyahu faces so much pressure from the right wing, the far right of his cabinet, not to accept a permanent end to the conflict. So unless he sort of dismisses that pressure from the likes of the far right ministers, this war is going to keep on going, isn't it?
Well, you're 100% right. But the question is, can Netanyahu say no to Trump? Look at what happened 3 nights ago when Israel had its planes heading to Tehran to bomb Iran again. And Trump simply told Netanyahu to have them do a U-turn and that the war is over. He told Netanyahu not to retaliate for the last rocket that was fired by Iran, and the ceasefire is holding. It seems to me that Israel is so dependent on the United States today, and the relationship between Netanyahu and Trump is such that Netanyahu is incapable of saying no to President Trump. So I think that either he is going to tell this to his government that he has no choice and they will stay because they have no better option than staying in Netanyahu's government, or they'll both the government and Netanyahu will bring Israel to elections, which is something that he's thinking about anyway.
Yeah, and he is climbing in popularity polls, of course, but current polls suggest that he would still fall short of an absolute majority. But Gershon, you know Hamas well. You've been negotiating with them for such a long time. I mean, they are likely to hold on to their bargaining chip. The remaining hostages, about 50 of them, about 28 of them believed to be dead, until the very last moment, aren't they? And until they can secure an assurance, some kind of written or legal assurance, that there will be a permanent end to the war. So unless they get that, then they're not going to release the last hostages, are they?
Well, that's for sure. They have told the Americans very clearly through their direct talks with Steve Witkoff and Bashar al-Bahbah that they are expecting a guarantee from President Trump himself that this time Israel will carry forth with the ceasefire, become a permanent ceasefire, and that Israel will withdraw from Gaza. These are the kind of assurances that President Trump needs to give to Hamas. The question is whether or not he will. I know that the American mediators, the Qataris and the Egyptians, are all pushing for an end of a war agreement with Israel. Hamas is ready to release all the hostages. They're, of course, demanding the release of a significant number of Palestinian prisoners. That's all part of the package deal. And the only way that Netanyahu is going to make this deal is, again, if Trump tells him to do it. This is what we're depending on. The safety of this region, the safety of Israel and the Palestinians is dependent right now on one person who sits in the White House.
Gershon Baskin, former Israeli negotiator, thank you very much indeed for your insights and for sparing the time with us here on BBC News.